Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Mysteries and Disappearances video. Alright, let's get back to it. We'll do another entry here. This one based on one of your newer suggestions. And this one having to do with a subject that seems to be very popular amongst my fans here. When I was reading this information, it also captivated me as well. It reminded me so much, in fact, of one of my more popular videos, the Orang Madan mystery, that I couldn't just help but just pick this one too for you all, because indeed it has to do with another missing ship and the very mysterious circumstances surrounding the disappearance of the crew. When I was reading the info and the plausible explanations for it, each one is pretty much concrete. Like, there's no direction that you can go towards finding and saying that's the one, that's the solution. That's why to this day this particular mystery is still so captivating, and it has to do with this. You're looking at it now. Essentially, it's the disappearance of the Mary Celeste. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all the fascinating information associated with this captivating story. So what was the Mary Celeste? What was the disappearance associated with it? Well, the Mary Celeste was a ship that was built or launched sometime in the 1800s, the mid 1800s to be specific. This was a ship that was basically used to trek around different continents, going through large amounts of sea just to get from point A to point B, while including cargo in those cases, important cargo, and then also a small amount of crew, usually around 7 to 10 with it. And from what I was reading, it made just a few trips until it had its most fateful encounter. As far as that encounter, though, let's talk about a brief history of the captain, because he remains tied to this mystery in a very big way. It had to do with this gentleman, Captain Briggs. Captain Benjamin Briggs was his name specifically. Guy that was born on April 24th, 1835, in a family full of sea captains, because apparently he was one of 5 sons within the family, and all but one of them eventually led a sea career, just like him. So in his case, he was just fulfilling the traditional family history of being out there in the sea. The irony, though, is there was one point where he was considering retiring from having this career because he wanted to be able to get away from the isolated life that having so many trips out to sea brings. But it looks like he decided to stick on board to his career, and then it led to this tragic circumstance. But yes, by all accounts, he seemed to be a stable man from what everyone was recounting of him afterward, after his disappearance. He was someone that was a very religious man, very strong married man too. Like in this case, he had his wife and he had his children with him too. He even had his children on his trips, and his most last one, the moment that disappeared, he had his children there too. He was always one that was considered high standing in his profession. He even picked his crew, handpicked them to make certain that they would serve both the ship and then its cargo, and then most importantly him and his family and everyone else in a very successful manner, because these were people that were also very dedicated to a life of sea. So, in other words, I'm mentioning all of this because some of the other theories that later come about involving mutiny or something else on the lines of him going mad, it's very far-fetched in terms of what led to the disappearance of all the crew, because in his case, he seems to be just someone very professional, very dedicated, a good family man, very religious, and he's just there to make sure that the job gets done. But yes, the way the story goes, this ship was yet again going to go out into sea, in this case from New York to another destination across the sea, and when it was going to do so, it was going to go out from a New York harbor. In fact, the original date was going to be November 5th, because there was going to be the original time period, but it turns out that the weather was not so good. So whenever that happened, it was decided 2 days later that this would occur, like that the departure date would then occur. It goes to show one more time, the importance of, in this case, the captain, because there he was making sure that he was not doing anything hasty or anything reckless. He saw how the weather was that day, and he decided, you know what, It's not worth it to go out. Let's wait 2 more days. And then this was again in the 1872 to be specific, that all of this was occurring. So November 7th, 1872, that's when the Mary Celeste, with his captain, his family, and then 7 other crew members, decided to go out and then leave, cross over to the Atlantic, and I believe their destination was a place called Genoa, if I'm not mistaken, there somewhere in Italy, if I'm not mistaken. Someone may have to correct me on this too, but I do believe that was the destination for them too. They were also carrying some very interesting cargo. I guess it was for a company or something along those lines, like that. You know, some people paying them to carry this cargo. It had to do with some weird acid, some kind of weird chemical that was within the bottom of the ship. This may play actually later on into the theories of why this ship disappeared, or why the crew disappeared within it. So everything seemed fine. November 7th happened. They left that location there, the New York harbor. There was actually evidence of it too from another ship called the Dei Gratia. This was captained by someone by the name of Captain David Morehouse, who, based on different tales, some tales state that he was a good friend of the captain of the Mary Celeste, and then others state that they were just mutual acquaintances. So it depends on who you read. And then there's even some theories that they even had one final dinner together before, in this case, Captain Briggs was able to go out from the New York harbor. But I mentioned this because they at least were a witness of the Mary Celeste leaving the New York harbor to eventually go out to its destination. But yes, everything seemed fine, but then cut to a little time later, and I think it was around December 5th, if I'm not mistaken, December 5th, 1872, this ship that I just mentioned, the De Gracia, the one that was again captained by David Morehouse, discovered that there was this vessel in the far distance. This was probably about midway between New York and then the original destination there in Italy. Midway, or probably we're closer to 3/4 across the way of the ship. It was a couple of weeks later. Whenever he saw this ship in the distance, they tried to see if there was anyone on board. They did communications from across a certain distance. I guess it's those flags or whatever else, the flashing of the lights or something else, to try to make sure that they could communicate, because they saw that this ship looked strange. There was these erratic movements associated with it. Its sails were not set correctly as well. They seemed to just be aimlessly turning in every direction, like the wind was letting them turn and was turning them instead of the other way around. And so the ship, the De Gracia, and its captain, its crew, they knew that something was wrong. And as they went closer to it, it was to their surprise that this ship, the insignia on it, was of the Mary Celeste, the very ship that they saw depart again a little earlier, a couple of weeks earlier. So they climbed on board, and then much to their further surprise, they saw that it was completely deserted. Like everything was just in a bad condition. Not like in a really horrible condition in a sense like there was a huge cataclysmic event, but still it was apparent that this place was abandoned for a while. And so because of it, and then because of the weather coming in, the windows being open, doors being open, it was just, things just looked in a very, very poor condition. This is in fact what they saw with regards to the ship. The sails, they were confirmed, were just partly set, like they were just aimlessly just going about based on the wind, whatever happened to be there in the air. And then also they found ropes just hanging loosely on the sides of several locations. Hatches were open too, hatches that normally are supposed to be closed, in other words, especially both on the deck and underneath. They were just open. There was also a missing lifeboat. Apparently the Mary Celeste only had one lifeboat for its small crew, but they found that it was completely gone as well. And then also a compass, something there within, I guess, the captain's cabin, or the crew, the top, it had something there, like it was its glass cover was broken. It seemed like it was an attempt to try to get it out, or maybe just the ship's condition, it just wandering about just caused it to just damage itself. Whatever was the case, they found that that's what it was. But most interestingly, they also found that there was food still there on the ship. In fact, it was like 6 months, something weird like that. So, a couple of months worth of food on the ship as is. There was no indication like that food was just grabbed in their haste to leave. There was no indication that there was a fire either, something that would just cause them to run out. They also found that there was valuables on the ship that were still there. In fact, when he went to Captain Briggs's cabin, he found that there was a sword there that was still within it was still sheathed, so it was still closed, and there was some other valuables there too. The only thing that still just led to some concrete answer was the fact that the life raft was actually not there, and the lifeboat itself was gone, and so because of it, they theorized that something must have happened which caused the crew to get on that lifeboat, and then they left thereafter. There was one other interesting thing too. They found a makeshift sounding rod, which is apparently used to try to gauge, how much water is on the bottom of the ship, also known as the hold of the ship. And I remember, on some of the Discovery shows, like Bering Sea Gold and others, where whenever it shows that you have a larger amount of water in the hold, then that could basically capsize the entire ship. And they saw that there was some water in there, about 3.5 feet, but nothing that would essentially cause everyone to abandon ship immediately. Not in the haste that they saw the conditions of the ship showcase. So that was pretty alarming to them, because something else must have happened to cause them to go about. Interestingly enough, the captain there of the Gracia and then the crew took over the company of the ship, and because there was nobody there clearly, and so they brought it about to its original location, and they were afterward following salvage laws thereafter. That's an interesting another little tidbit that I'll just briefly cover. Apparently during that time period, and it may still be happening even now, if you find an abandoned ship, then you can claim both the ship and then also all of its contents for yourself. If not 100%, you'll get a percentage of it, and so because of it, they tried to do that thereafter, and I'll mention more on that too, on the theories to the disappearance, because it takes a more dastardly turn as to what happened. But even to this day, ever since the discovery of that lost ship and then of course its missing crew, nothing was ever found afterward of the people there. Not the captain, not his family, none of the crew, nobody. They were just completely gone. And even after all this time period, when people try to find out, maybe they were recovered, maybe bodies were recovered, anything like that, no, everything was it just completely just disappeared off the face of the earth, which leads now finally to the theories as to why this ship that disappeared. There's some of the ones that are more, I guess, real based, like more common sense based. There's one notion that there's the idea that there was foul play. I was mentioning that earlier with the captain, and I was mentioning his professionalism beforehand, because the notion was that maybe there was a mutiny. Maybe the captain was doing something so wrong that the crew decided to go ahead and mutiny, and so because of it, they in turn took over the ship, abandoned the ship, and then who knows what happened to them thereafter. But the fact that none of them took some of their materials, like the food, possessions, whatever they had that was important to them, kind of goes, throws that theory to the side, also because of the captain's noted professionalism, and also because of the fact that that theory was very unpopular when it was introduced in certain articles. There's another theory that ties into the Gracia ship itself, the one that found, in this case, the Mary Celeste. Remember I was mentioning that captain there, the David Morehouse, how he was able to claim salvage rights for it. Well, the other notion is this, that the ship itself, in this case, was waiting for the Mary Celeste to come about out there in the sea. And so they took the ship hostage, either killed the crew, threw them over, whatever was the case. And then once that happened, they would be able to get the salvage rights, and then they could claim afterward, well, we didn't know what happened to the ship. We just found it with the crew missing as is, and no one would know any better. The problem though with that theory is the fact again that the Mary Celeste left 5 days or 7 days earlier than the DeGracia from the New York harbor, and the DeGracia was known as a slower ship than the Mary Celeste. So, and then also Captain Morehouse was also known as someone who was respected within his profession. So for him to suddenly turn something like this, where he would purposely take over another ship just to be able to murder the crew and then keep their possessions afterward, and all the assets, that just was also a theory that was not floating. Then there was more common sense ones too, involving what happened nature-like in other words the environment, and what could have impacted the ship. There's one interesting theory involving water spouts. Apparently the notion is this, that the ship had run into these natural phenomena, these water spouts, kind of like little mini tornadoes within the ocean, on top of the ocean, and because of it, it brought more water onto the ship than the crew thought they could survive. And so that's why they made that sounding rod, the one that they could try to find and measure the water in the bottom of their ship, and they got like false readings. And so they thought to themselves, let's get onto the lifeboat and then we can get off it, save ourselves in case the ship is about to go under, and then if it's not, then we'll just get on board afterward. So that was interesting to read too, because it also leads to this, that the same water spouts could have caused the lifeboat to capsize. So there they were getting off of the ship to prevent themselves from drowning from the ship going under, but they inadvertently also fell victim to the water spout. So that was another interesting thing. Another also angle involving environmental stuff happens to do with sea quakes, little or large earthquakes that happen at the very bottom of the ocean. Apparently when those occur, the reverberations from them can go towards the very surface of the sea, and when that happens, it just creates havoc on the instruments or on the ships themselves, and then it could have brought water into the hold, and again given them a false rating or a false signal into how much water they had. And so whenever they got into the lifeboat to get off it, then that's when they realized, things are okay, but for whatever reason they could not get back onto the Mary Celeste. Or remember I was mentioning earlier that they were carrying those weird chemicals, those barrels of chemical. I think there was I was reading there was 10 of them. Only 8 of them were filled with that stuff, and then the other 2, something else was filled with it. But the very same sea quakes could have broken some of those chemicals, in the barrels, and then the noxious fumes were just too much to handle, and so that's why they had to abandon ship. But eventually that the lifeboat capsized, or something else happened to the lifeboat that they were not able to get on the ship. The fact that there were so many windows open, hatches open, lots of stuff that normally shouldn't be open, leads credence to this theory, because it seemed like they were trying to draft the air out of whatever was within the ship to make sure that they couldn't die or suffer from these noxious fumes. So that's just another going theory associated with it. And then there's even this, if you can believe it too, there's the idea that both captains, in this case one from the Mary Celeste and then the other one from the DeGracia, both of them were in collusion. Like they actually were working together to make it seem like the crew disappeared when actually they were just someplace else, who knows where in the world, because the ship was overinsured, and so that way they could claim insurance findings on the ship, and then they would share in the ill-gotten profits. This, though, was, of course, thrown out afterward because nobody was going to believe something along those lines, because the captain and her crew never just were ever found to, and then also, they were not there to claim any of the funds afterward. But yes, those are all interesting theories, all of them associated with why the Mary Celeste had its disappearances, why it was seemingly abandoned in a haste. Not enough to where, again, there was a calamity, but still enough to ensure that they didn't get some of the most important things that were on the ship. And to this day, no one knows. No one knows exactly what happened. It's made some interesting mediums, like in books and then also in movies. There was a movie of Bela Lugosi. Arthur Conan Doyle also made a book associated with it, giving his own theories. But yes, it's just crossed so many mediums by now, and to this day, no one knows exactly what happened afterward. But that's it. That's pretty much all the information associated with the disappearance of the Mary Celeste and her crew. If anyone has any other angle I might have missed, something else that sounds interesting, that could also lead evidence as to why the Mary Celeste was abandoned and what happened to her crew, then please post those comments below. I haven't even gone into other stuff like involving pirates, but then again, if the pirates were stealing stuff, why didn't they take anything in the cargo hold or any of the valuables too? And then there's also other stuff just way out there too, like involving like the Bermuda Triangle type stuff, where you have just a weird place where people disappear out in the sea, and this thing, the Mary Celeste, the ship, was just a victim of it. That's just another angle that people have as well. So, but yes, indeed, if anybody has anything else that they'd like to post, please post those comments below. I'd definitely be happy to hear. So, all right, everybody, thanks again as always. Take care.